Today's podcast, I'm going to talk about two experiments that I am at the tail end of, and I want to share all the learnings with you. Those experiments, I renovated two houses that I don't own. First time I've ever done this. I wanted to try something a little bit new for my business. I knew there would be some learnings, and I finally have those learnings, and I've bucketed them together to share with you. And this will be super applicable for you if you are a licensed real estate agent, because how I'm making my money is I'm listing the houses as a premium style listing. When I say premium, just I'm charging a higher commission. That's how I'm making my money. And I loaned these two homeowners a whole bunch of money, and I renovated their houses with my team. I think if you are not a licensed real estate agent, you may still get some value because essentially the learnings revolve around contractor expectations, because essentially what I learned is that these two homeowners hired me as a contractor, and then I'm subbing out my teams. And I will talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. Who am I? My name is Ryan Rice. I am a full-time real estate investor. I did about 40 deals last year. I'll do about that much, maybe a little bit more this year. And I share all of this stuff in the hopes that it helps you make more money in your real estate business. So these two deals. First, let me talk about why I did them. If you are not an OG listener and hadn't heard this story before, both of these sellers came to me. They wanted to sell me their house. And when I offered cash, we couldn't make something work. Their expectations were higher. They had specific scenarios in each of their personal life that they could not accept an offer below a certain amount. So to try to maximize how much I could put in both of their pockets, I did this deal where I renovated the house and I don't have to buy it. That obviously saves me a ton of financing costs, closing costs. And if I'm not buying the house, then it also saves a little bit of profit, right? Because maybe I'd like to make 30 to 50 grand profit. Well, if I'm putting a deed of trust and a promissory note against a house, it's secured and I have a listing agreement with the seller. I know I'm going to sell it, so my risk is a little bit lower since I'm not the one taking title of the house. So I can make a little bit less on these deals. So that's why I did it. And let's get into what I learned. When I did this type of deal, again, I knew that there would be things that I would learn. And what I didn't realize in the beginning is that the sellers are essentially hiring me as a contractor. And someone said that to me. I was telling a good friend in the real estate industry about what I was doing. And he very casually said to me, "Oh, well, essentially, you're a contractor." And I thought about that and I was like, yeah, I think that's probably exactly it. And because I've never been a contractor, there were things now that I have been through this that I will make sure that I will do if I do this type of deal again. And I really understand, I think, what it means to be on the contractor side and the level of communication and expectations that need to be set. So here are the learnings that I had. I have 5 learnings. I'm going to go through each one. The first, you have to communicate to them like you're a contractor. And so what I mean is when your contractor is sending you a bid, your expectations of what you expect from your contractor might be different from what your seller expects from you. And that seller might want to see the bid. They might want to see a line item breakdown of everything that's included. They might want to see all of the costs explained. They don't understand the expectation around change orders, right? So me having renovated a ton of houses with crews that I own, how I normally run those jobs is they go to a house, I give them some finish guidance, but they know the expectation at this point. And they also know that if they find something that needs to be fixed because we're going to sell the house, they're just going to fix it and they're going to bill me for it if it's something that wasn't originally included. Well, you can't exactly run your job with a seller like that, because the seller hasn't renovated a bunch of houses. And if you remember when you were in the beginning, any sort of change orders, I remember them and I was like, well, what do you mean? It's more money. And it was a little bit more fickle of a conversation. Now I have a better grasp. But you essentially need to put yourself in the homeowner's shoes around all of the communication and all of the expectations. And how I tried to run these jobs was just how I normally run them from a construction standpoint. And I needed to be a lot more proactive with my communication to the seller. So one of the jobs, the seller moved out of the house and we had free reign in the house and it was a lot easier to renovate. The seller was still living in the house and it wasn't a hoarder situation, but the seller has tons of stuff. And so there was a lot of logistics to move through with that. So communication is just really important. When you get your contractor bid, it's important that you communicate that to the seller. What I will probably do going forward is have a list of everything that's happening from a scope of work, presenting it to him and or her, and having them sign it, just so there's no discrepancy or no question about what's included, what's not included. But that communication is super, super important. The second thing I learned is you have to be really detailed coming up with a scope of work and making sure that they have a written copy of everything that's being completed and having them sign it, just like I said. And so, whereas the first learning was just around the proactive communication as it relates to communicating to the seller a lot of things that I, obviously don't need to communicate if I'm renovating a house that I own. But this second learning is just how important it is to be super detailed with the scope of work, because the last thing you want is, in the beginning, what's likely to happen is you're going to walk the property with the seller and the contractor, and there are things that are going to be talked about. And if there are any misunderstandings or communication gaps where the seller thinks that we talked about doing one thing, but the contractors understood something different, then it has the possibility to create some friction. So coming up with a detailed scope of work is super important. The third learning is being very clear on material, right? So if you're walking around the house and there's an exterior back door that needs to be replaced, and the current exterior back door has a picture window in it, you want to make sure that you're clear on what type of door are we replacing it. Because the last thing you want is, let's say the contractor knows that because we're renovating and we're selling, we want to be price conscious, and the contractor has that general expectation because they have worked with you before. If they put an exterior door there without a window, that could create some friction. And so it's important to be even more descriptive than what you usually are, because regardless of whether or not that back door with or without a window is going to impact the sale price, the seller, because it's the seller's house, may just have an opinion on what should be there, and you don't want there to be any friction. The fourth learning is just encouraging frequent communication between the contract and the owner. So if you're going to renovate a house that you don't own, the seller is most likely going to communicate with you, and you're going to be the front man. But the problem is you're not going to be at the job site all the time. And if there is not really, really good communication between the owner and the person who's actually working in the house, then it just could create some friction or some communication breakdown. And so what I will do going forward with these types of deals is, in the beginning, let's say after we walk through the house and come up with a scope of work, I will frame up what the communication is going to look like. So, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Contractor, I want to make sure that you are in communication with the owner owner, I want to make sure you are comfortable and in communication with the contractor and framing up just what that communication is going to look like. Because otherwise, if you're not always on the job site and the seller is only communicating with you, there are going to be things that are going to be missed. And inevitably, in a construction project, there's going to be misunderstandings, there's going to be things that happen, and you just don't want there to be friction. Or not that you don't want there to be friction. Friction is okay, but how the highest probability of preventing lots of friction is just ensuring that there's good communication. And if that expectation is not established and that vehicle of communication is not established in the beginning, then it has the potential to cause extra friction. And then the fifth learning is, I'm going to call this setting an expectation around how the owner communicates to the contractor. And here's what I mean. It seems very, very frequent in the contracting industry that if a contractor does a total of 100 line item things, and let's say 10 of those things have or need some attention, right? They need some sort of follow-up because those 10 things, maybe they weren't done correctly, or maybe the workers made a mistake, or whatever the case may be. That still means 90 things were done great. What's all too common in this industry is that the owner focuses on those 10 things, and that's all that the owner talks about. And a conversation I'm going to have with every owner going forward when I do this is, hey, something that I have found is very useful when communicating with contractors is if you see a behavior that you want to see repeated. In other words, let's say that you see a piece of trim painted really well, or the flooring is laid nicely, or whatever the case may be sure to recognize them and give them kudos for that, because there will inevitably be a time when you see something that you want corrected. And if the only time you're bringing up something to the contractor is when you have an issue, then it could be perceived that the only thing that you're focusing on is all of the negative. And just like us, contractors are human, and it's helpful for them to have reinforcement. And it's going to come across more respectful. And so I'm going to have a conversation with the owner about how to communicate with the contractor, kind of coach and prep the owner on, hey, here are some things I might suggest. Here are some things that have worked well for me, having worked with them before. And it didn't occur to me in the beginning that I would need to have that type of conversation because, again, I'm bringing my crew in. We're going to renovate like we always do. I don't have a problem. But especially if an owner is going to be living in the house and while the renovation is going on, some owners might be looking over the shoulder a lot more. And so having a pre-framed conversation with the seller about, hey, here's kind of some things that I would suggest in terms of how you communicate to the contractor, it just could help navigate and make sure that that relationship is going to be optimal and preventing friction. Because the last thing that you want is you have a seller and they've done 100 things, the contractor's done 100 things, 90 of them look great, 10 of them have or need follow-up, and all the seller wants to do is talk about those 10, then that is going to create friction for the contractor, and it's just not going to be optimal for the rest of the job going forward. So, and obviously you can apply that hiring contractors. It's so important that you're not just always pointing out something wrong that the contractors are doing. When you see a behavior that you want repeated, always call it out and give kudos, because that's how those behaviors are reinforced and that's how they're repeated. So that's it, kind of short and sweet, and not a whole bunch of in-depth learnings, but the biggest learning is simply around communication, expectations, how to facilitate a job and keep everybody happy, how to make sure from the beginning that the seller has the right expectations with the scope of work, the quality of materials, and just helping to navigate what that relationship is going to be like, because there's a third party that is added to the fold that is not usually a part of a contractor and owner relationship if you're just buying a house. So I probably will do a job like this again, and I will simply apply these learnings, and I think that can help these jobs move forward a little bit more effectively. It is a little bit more involved, and so I think ideally, if I'm wholesaling a house, that is the easiest transaction to make money. And in this case, if I'm flipping it, it's a little bit easier because I own it, and then doesn't have to be this third party involved. But if you're looking for another tool to add in your tool belt and you have a license, this can be just another way you can put more money in the seller's pocket, which I think is super, super in service to that client. And doing that, I think, is going way above and beyond. And I think you can earn some big kudos with the sellers by doing something like this. If you are listing it, you're going to be a little bit more involved. There are going to be more tasks. You may have to go by the property more. But again, it can be another tool belt that you have to serve people or get deals that maybe you otherwise wouldn't be able to get. So that's it. Hope that was helpful. And I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.